What's up, folks? So, the position being taken is not to be mistaken for attempted education or righteous accusation, only a description, just an observation of the pitiful condition of our degeneration. That is to say, we're going to listen to Operation Ivy, Room Without a View, one of my favorite songs of one of my favorite bands. I haven't reacted to them in a long time, which once I realized that, it was like, oh man, I really have been remiss. Indeed, I mentioned it before, Propagandhi in one way will always be one of my favorite bands because they brought me to the world of punk rock, which is to say, you know, when I went to Canada, I went to an ice hockey camp and a kid there had a Propagandhi cassette tape and it literally changed my life because it sort of brought me to the world of punk rock, which soon brought me to the world of the Subhumans and Bad Religion and Operation Ivy. And if you didn't know, Operation Ivy, short live band, they were around from, I think, is it 87 to 89? I think it's like 87 to 89, and then they broke up. Or maybe it was like, I think it was like 89 to 91. No, 91 is when the compilation came out. I think it is 87 to 89, and I think their one only album, or their single studio album, which is Energy, it came out, I think, 89. And they broke up shortly after that. In fact, after they were like offered a major label record deal, which is crazy to think, you know, that if you look at their lyrics, most of which are written by Jesse Michaels, more on that in a second. But yeah, it's crazy to me that a major label was like, yeah, you know, this is like cool enough that we're gonna put it out there, because I feel like, you know, it's the kind of band that would not have pulled any punches. You know, in the same way that like Rage Against the Machine, I'm still surprised that like a major label, you know, gave them the platform. I'm happy that it happened, but again, it seems like it's just a surprising quirk of musical history, because normally that's the kind of band that big labels are like, nah, that's way too controversial, we're going to stay away from that. Nevertheless, they're one of my favorite groups. I absolutely love their flavor of ska-punk. Indeed, of all the sort of ska-punk bands that I know, they remain the gold standard for me. Now again, I didn't listen to them when they were around. I discovered punk rock music like 94, like early 94, a few months after Propagandhi's first album had come out. And so they were already, you know, defunct for a few years by that point. And if you didn't know, a couple of them went on to make some pretty notable bands. In particular, as some crazy shit happens outside, but in particular Rancid, I think, is the most famous of the sort of successor groups. The Transplants also, Tim Armstrong. Lint, as he was occasionally known back in the Op Ivy days. But Jesse Michaels, again, I find to be maybe the most interesting of the members of Operation Ivy, although he has been very occasional and selective in his musical output since then. He's been in a couple groups. Big Rig was one. There's another one more recently. It's like the Something of Love. I'm blanking on what it is in the moment. But ultimately, I love his lyrics. There's a poetry, there's a humanity, there's a clever, like, sort of turn of phrase. Also, he's a very perceptive individual, and I think this song is a perfect example. That is to say, we're talking about, in this song, Room Without a View, which is essentially a sort of phrase depicting the way that people get sort of locked into their mind and their worldview, and they don't really venture outside of that, even when evidence is bearing in on that worldview and trying to show them what is actually happening out in the world. But it speaks to the way in which, you know, people get opinions over time, and they begin to sort of like only think in those opinions, and they don't let perspective or information from other people come into their head. And ultimately, you know, it leads them to sort of, you know, be fine with people dying in different places, even, you know, home, in their own backyard, if you will, if it allows them to keep that sort of, you know, narrow worldview that they don't have to think outside of. And it's ultimately the way in which, you know, those sort of attitudes kind of reinforce the worst things that humans do, and the sort of, you know, the mindless slaughter of human lives because people have to maintain some national fiction or some sort of socioeconomic pyramid to make themselves feel like their opinions are justified and valid. So it's the way in which we get ensconced in these sort of dogmatic ways of thinking, and ultimately, you know, beyond that, we're willing to sort of, you know, turn our eyes, avert our attention if it allows us to maintain that fantasy. But again, what I love about this song, and again, this is something that you see in a lot of their lyrics, you know, Jesse's basically saying, like, look, this isn't me preaching to you. This isn't me telling you normatively everyone has to do this and it's only going to be fair when this happens. I'm just saying this is what I see. It's just a description, just an observation of the pitiful condition of our degeneration, which is, again, in part because we get so locked into our, you know, sort of arrogant and sort of entrenched attitudes and ideas about things as we grow old, that we simply aren't willing to kind of see things for what they are if it makes us uncomfortable or it makes us have to maybe think about changing our ways. So with all that in mind, let's get it. It's not too long of a song, but as I always say in punk rock reactions, you know, you just got to talk about these things. So here we go. This is Operation Ivy, Room Without a View, originally from their 1989 album Energy, but heard here on the 91 compilation, which includes that plus 2 EPs that they had put out.
The position being taken is not to be mistaken for attempted education or righteous accusation. Only a description, just an observation of the pitiful condition of our generation. One made of opinions, to which we think the devil is a thing made of pride. There's a kind of brother's one, so the fatal grade, heart is fully aged, always closed and gentle with everywhere we wait. In a room without a window, can't stay out. Room without a window, get out. Floors made of life, we gladly used to stay inside. Corners made of borders, and borders made of order. With the bullets and the demolition, flashing with the records of a cultural division. Without a window, can't see out.
That verse.
Without a window, get me out.
Oh, we so stupid.
Killing each other. Don't we learn nothing? Gotta bring the time of mind. Yeah, we get the other cause we're blind. But I got to choke. Got to make a bell straight. Alright, from the room without a window to a different way to think. Gotta run outside of mine. Yeah, we get the other cause we're blind. But I got to choke. Gotta make a bell straight. Alright, from the room without a window to a different way to think. The position being taken is not to be mistaken for attempted education. Righteous accusation, only a description, just an observation of the pitiful condition. Modern generation, room without a window, can't stay out. Room without a window, get me out. Room without a window, can't stay out. Room without a window, get me out.
Love it. Again, it's like, I remember when I was you know, going to high school, and like for the first couple years of high school, you know, I'm not old enough to drive, so I would carpool with, you know, some days my parents would drive, some days these other kids' parents would drive. But I remember, like, when it was my parents driving for the first couple years, I could kind of pick what we listened to on the way to school, and I was getting into punk rock, so it was usually a punk rock group. And I remember of all the bands, my mom found this group the most annoying, and it was because of Jesse Michael's voice. And look, I get that. It's not the most sonorous or classically trained voice. But I remember trying to make the point to her that, like, if you like read these lyrics on the page, I bet you would respect the songwriting intelligence and creativity. And I stand by that. I really do think that, you know, it sounds more sort of, you know, kind of visceral and, you know, just kind of thrashy, but when you actually read the lyrics of Operation Ivy songs, I think they were espousing some profound ideas and expressing them in some poetic lines. And again, there's that that second verse. I think it ends with the wreckage of our cultural division. It's just a testament to Jesse Michael's songwriting. So again, I didn't hear too much Big Rig. It's, you know, the groups he was in after that never kind of reached the same level of significance as Operation Ivy, or indeed of the other guys' successor projects like Rancid. Again, I think is the most well-known, maybe the Transplants, but I think for a long time Rancid would have been the most well-known of the, you know, sort of projects that grew out of the remaining, or the, you know, the members of Operation Ivy after that group went by the wayside. But it is a shame. And now, that being said, you could count, or you would need like an insane number of like a bullet point list to list all the groups that have been inspired by Operation Ivy. A number of bands talk about how that was like a really big influence, both in the ska and punk world. So they were short-lived, but they certainly, you know, their legacy is secure in the history of punk and ska. But yeah, like I said, I reacted to them a number of times when I started doing punk rock reactions, because you might not be surprised, it was one of the groups that immediately, once I realized, like, oh, I'm going to react to stuff outside in techno and trance, well, okay, I got to do punk rock, and oh, damn, I got to do Operation Ivy. But I think it's actually been like 4 or 5 months since I've actually gone back for one, so this was nice to come back to. Again, they don't have the hugest catalog, but even saying that, I think this is like the 14th or 15th of, maybe not even that, because I think a couple of them are covers. Like I did a Blue Meanies cover, I think I did a Mad Caddies cover. Interestingly enough, Sleep Long is one of my favorite Operation Ivy songs. If you haven't heard it, please go listen to the Mad Caddies cover of Sleep Long. I reacted to it, but whether you listen to that or just go listen to the song proper, I highly recommend hearing that. It's one of the coolest covers, and maybe my favorite Op Ivy cover I've ever heard. And I have heard quite a few, because I've heard a couple different like tribute albums. There's one, the one that the Blue Meanies comes from. It's all Op Ivy covers. I'm blanking on the name of it. Nevertheless, I will end this video because it is like 10 times as long as the song itself. But yeah, let me know what you think of this awesome song. Luca and I will see you next time. Peace.